Hello and welcome to I Talk to Ghosts. I'm your spirited host, Jennifer, a professional medium and a teller of ghost stories. As we near the end of 2023, I want to take the time to thank you for sharing so much of your time with me. The spooky chills and the fascinating spiritual moments mean all the more to me because we experienced them together. I still consider this podcast to be fairly new, and I can't help to look back at how wonderful it's been to create, the people I have met, and the amazing connections that occurred because of it, and how it's challenged me to grow as a medium. They're all things I couldn't have predicted, but I keep it close to my heart. I really do. So thank you for making 2023 such a magical year. And now, dear listener, let's finish out the year with some spooky. Gathering near the warm firelight and telling ghost stories is a very old tradition. So I have gathered for you some new and chilling stories to tell to you tonight. So come close. Let's share a few more ghost stories together. And I hope to spend time with you again next week in 2024. This ghost story was submitted by Stephanie in Oregon. If you would like to submit a ghost story to be read on the podcast, email me at speaknow@italktoghosts.com. Thank you, Stephanie, for your story. I was sleeping one early spring night when all of a sudden, this howling wind woke me up. It was so loud and creepy, just like the way the wind can sound in a scary movie. Somehow, I went back to sleep. And when I awoke in the morning, I didn't really think about it. Later the next day, I received a phone call from my cousin, letting us know that my uncle had passed during the night. It had happened around the time I had woken up to the sound of that howling wind. My uncle had been a grandfather figure to me and my daughter. For that reason, receiving the news of his passing made us very sad. He was 2 days away from celebrating his 80th birthday. He had recently had surgery, and he had called me a few days before to tell me he felt his life was coming to an end. We talked about how death is a celebration on the other side, because Spirit is so happy to welcome us back. And his mom would be waiting there to welcome him with open arms. He seemed to be comforted by that image. Little did I know that that was the last conversation I would have with him. He died peacefully in his sleep the night the howling wind had woke me up. Never before or after that night had I been woken up by the sound of the wind. At the time it was startling, but now that I understand, I'm sure that sound was my uncle passing by on his way to the other side. In 1985, I was 17 and dating a girl in Indiana. Her dad and I became close, and we were both football fans. I was there late one night in December, after a game. It was about 2 a.m. when we heard this banging outside, and her father said, "Wanna see something?" We got bundled up and treaded outside into the knee-high snow. The town was quiet, and a light snow was falling all around us. They lived outside of town with a field across the road and just a few houses nearby. We went around their house, and I could see a light in their neighbor's shed. Shadows were flashing through the light, and you could tell the light bulb inside was swinging. The shed had windows in each door and opened barn style. As we got closer, I could see tools flying around the room and banging against the walls. I looked at him and asked, "What is going on?" He said, "I've seen this twice. Watch." When we got to the shed's doors, he reached up to grab the handle and looked at me just before he grasped it. He said, "Wait. Now watch this." Then grabbed the handle. It was like a switch had been flipped. The light went out and everything stopped. All you could hear was the wind. Finally, he said, "Show's over," and we walked back silently. I went into the service a few months later and never saw him again. We never talked about it, not once. 20 years later, I ran into my ex-girlfriend and told her the story. She said he never told her about it. She got out her cell phone while I was there and called him, and he said, "Oh yeah, that was something all right." She hung up and shrugged her shoulders and said, "That's just like him." Hello, my dear spooky friend. Do you have a paranormal experience you would like to share? Submit your ghost stories to be read on this podcast. I love sharing true ghost stories, and yours could be among them. Email me your story at speaknow@italktoghosts.com. Let's be spooky together. This happened to my sister and brother-in-law who live in Ireland. Eileen was knitting after dinner when suddenly in the room above, a horrendous loud crash came like something really heavy just fell. She and her husband ran up the stairs to investigate, to find a heavy wardrobe was lying face down on the floor. They managed to lift it back up, and to their shock, they saw 3 long, deep gashes across the doors of the wardrobe, as if something had tried to claw its way into it. For the next 3 nights, the wardrobe would fall forward on its own with a crash that shook the whole house. There was no explanation to what caused this. One night, Eileen was woken up by the sound of crying, a woman weeping bitterly. So, she climbed out of bed, walking to where the weeping was coming from, at the stairs landing, and saw a recently deceased sister sitting and weeping. Eileen gingerly approached her. "Mary," she said gently, "why are you crying? Why are you here?" Mary replied, "I want my hairbrush. I want my hairbrush." "And where is your hairbrush?" Eileen asked. "In the wardrobe." The next morning, the family emptied the wardrobe and came across a pink hairbrush. Assuming that that was what Mary was looking for, they went to the cemetery and placed the hairbrush on her gravestone. She never came back after that. We bought a house built in the 1960s. that had an existing washer and dryer still in it. They worked well enough, so we kept them. The first night in the house, the washing machine started by itself. I didn't think much of it. It must have been a loose switch or something. I just turned it off and went about my day. The next time, while sitting and watching TV, it happened again. This time, I double-checked that all the knobs and the buttons were turned off, which they were. Puzzling, but not alarming. By the third time, I'm thinking this old machine needed replacing. So I sold it and I bought a new set. A few weeks later, imagine my surprise when the new washing machine did the exact same thing. Now, I got pretty frustrated, so I said out loud, without even thinking, "This is not funny anymore. You can stay, but you don't need to do the laundry." And that was the end of the situation. It never happened again. True story. This year, when you're at another boring holiday gathering, make sure to turn to the person next to you and ask, "Hey, do you know any good ghost stories?" And then share the I Talk to Ghosts podcast with them. No more awkward silences trying to figure out what to say, what to talk about. Talk about ghosts. Talk about spirit readings. Share the I Talk to Ghosts podcast. Thank you and happy spooky holidays. And with that, dear listener, we've reached the end of this last episode for 2023 of I Talk to Ghosts. I hope you've enjoyed the chilling ghost stories that I shared with you this evening. And if you have a ghost story that you would love for me to share on the podcast, be sure to reach out and tell it to me. In the meantime, wherever you wander off to, in this world or the next, just remember, come back and visit with me. Have a lovely evening and good night.